The snow was falling so thick Clara Whitmore couldn't see her own hands anymore. Behind her, the wagon that had brought her here was already gone, disappeared into the white darkness like her dreams. 43 years old, penniless, abandoned by a man who'd promised marriage but delivered only cruelty. Too old, he'd sneered before turning her away into the storm. Now she was dying. Her legs wouldn't move. Her lungs burned with ice. But there, through the blinding white, was that a light? If you're watching, please stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The advertisement had been simple. Almost too simple, Clara thought now as she stumbled through knee-deep snow, each step a battle against wind that wanted to knock her flat. Widowed rancher seeking companionable wife. Age and appearance less important than character and capability. Must be willing to work alongside husband in building a life. Respond to Mr. James Hendricks, care of Sweetwater Station, Wyoming Territory. Less important. Those had been the words that gave her hope. At 43, Clara had watched opportunity after opportunity pass her by in Philadelphia. Too old for the factories that wanted quick hands and young backs. Too plain for the gentlemen seeking ornamental wives. Too poor to maintain even the boarding house room where she'd spent the last decade mending other people's clothes for coins that never quite added up to anything resembling security. The advertisement had arrived in the general store where she sometimes sold her needlework. Mrs. Patterson, the owner, had shown it to her with a knowing look. Wyoming's a long way from civilization, Clara. But then again, what's civilization done for you lately? What indeed? So Clara had spent her last $47 on train fare west, carrying everything she owned in a single carpet bag and wearing her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved for 20 years in the vain hope that her own chance would come. That dress was soaked through now, heavy as lead, dragging her down into the snow. She'd arrived at Sweetwater Station 3 days ago. The telegram from Hendricks had been waiting. Sending wagon Thursday morning. Driver will bring you to ranch. We'll wed that afternoon. Be ready. She'd been ready. She'd been more than ready. She'd spent those 3 days in the tiny boarding room above the general store, rehearsing what she'd say, imagining what he'd be like, constructing elaborate fantasies about the life they'd build together. The wagon had arrived exactly when promised. The driver, a sullen man named Pike, who smelled of whiskey and hadn't spoken more than grunted directions, had loaded her bag without ceremony. The ride had taken 4 hours through increasingly desolate country, the scattered homesteads giving way to open rangeland broken only by fence lines and the occasional windmill spinning against a sky that grew darker by the mile. They'd arrived at Hendricks Ranch just as the first snowflakes began to fall. The house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and several outbuildings arranged in a neat semicircle behind it. Cattle dotted the visible landscape, dark shapes against the whitening ground. A dog had barked somewhere. Smoke rose from the chimney. Clara's heart had hammered as she stepped down from the wagon, smoothing her dress, touching her hair, silver-streaked brown that she'd tried to pin in a way that looked both respectable and not too severe. The door had opened. James Hendricks was perhaps 50, thick through the middle, with a face that seemed carved from something harder than wood and colder than stone. His eyes had moved over her with the same expression a man might use when examining a horse that turned out to be lame. "You're the bride?" "Clara Whitmore, sir. I received your—" "How old are you?" The question had struck her like a slap. That is, I'm 43, but I assure you I'm perfectly capable of—" 43. He'd said it like a curse, like an accusation. The advertisement said age didn't matter. It said age was less important than— "I expected a woman who could give me children, strong sons to work this ranch." His lip had actually curled. "You're old enough to be a grandmother." Heat had flooded Clara's face, shame and anger mixing into something that made her voice shake. The advertisement specifically stated that age and appearance were— I don't care what the advertisement stated. Hendricks had turned to Pike. "Take her back. This was a waste of everyone's time." "Back?" Pike had shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, there's a storm coming in. Big one. The station's 4 hours away and—" "Not my problem. I'm not keeping her here." Clara had found her voice then, though it came out higher than she'd intended. "Mr. Hendricks, I've traveled over 1,000 miles. I've spent everything I have. If you'll just give me a chance to… To what? Turn back time? Make yourself 20 years younger? He'd actually laughed. A short, ugly sound. I need a wife who can build a future, not one who's already used up most of hers. Please. The word had tasted like ashes. I have nowhere else to go. If I could just stay until the storm passes, perhaps work for my board, I could… Pike, get her out of here. The driver had reached for her arm, but Clara had jerked away, climbing back into the wagon under her own power, her back straight despite the trembling in her limbs. She wouldn't give Hendricks the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not yet. The bag had been tossed up after her, landing at her feet with a thud that seemed to echo in her chest. Go on, Hendricks had said, already turning back toward his warm house. And next time, be honest about your age. Save everyone the trouble. The door had closed, the wagon had lurched into motion, and Clara had sat frozen in disbelief as the ranch disappeared behind them, the snow falling faster, the wind picking up, reality settling over her like a shroud. She'd crossed a continent for this, spent her last hope for this, dressed in her mother's wedding gown for this. 20 minutes into the return journey, the storm had arrived in earnest. The snow hadn't fallen so much as attacked, horizontal sheets of white that made it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The temperature had dropped so fast Clara could feel it through her wet dress, through her thin coat, down into her bones. Pike had pulled the wagon to a stop. Can't see the road, he'd shouted over the wind. We'll have to wait it out. Here? Clara had looked around at the empty whiteness. How long? However long it takes. But Pike had his own bottle for warmth, and as the minutes stretched into an hour, then two, his attention had turned inward and his hands had grown clumsy on the reins. The horses had stamped nervously, their breath coming in great plumes of steam. Clara had tried to speak to him several times, but he'd waved her off, taking another pull from his bottle. When he'd finally passed out completely, slumping against the wagon's side, Clara had known she had only one choice: stay here and freeze, or try to find shelter. She'd taken her bag. She'd climbed down, and she'd started walking in the direction she thought, hoped, might lead to some kind of civilization. That had been… how long ago? An hour? 2? Time had lost all meaning in the white chaos. Her fingers had gone numb first, then her feet. Now she couldn't feel her face at all, which was almost a mercy because it meant the wind didn't hurt quite so much when it slammed into her. The carpet bag had become impossible to carry. She'd left it somewhere behind her, another loss in a day of losses. But what did it matter now? The bag held nothing but old dresses and older dreams. She fell, got up, fell again. This time, getting up seemed impossibly hard. The snow was actually quite comfortable, she thought distantly. Soft, like feather pillows. She could just rest here a moment. What? Just close her eyes and rest. Her mother's voice came to her then, clear as if the woman stood beside her. Claire Whitmore, you get up this instant. I didn't raise a quitter. I'm not quitting, Mama, Claire whispered into the snow. I'm just so tired. Then rest when you're safe. Not before. But safe was a fantasy now. Safe was a ranch house with a warm fire and a man who didn't measure a woman's worth by the freshness of her face or the theoretical fertility of her womb. Safe didn't exist. She closed her eyes. No. The word came from her own mouth, surprising her. No, damn it! Clara pushed herself to her hands and knees, then to her feet. Swaying like a drunk, she forced herself to take another step. Then another. There. Through the white. Was that? Yes. A light. Faint but real, like a distant star. A house. Please, she whispered. Though whether to fate or fortune or some power she no longer believed in, she couldn't say. Please let them be kind. The distance seemed to stretch forever. The light would disappear behind sheets of snow, and she'd panic, thinking she'd lost it. Then it would reappear, fractionally closer. Her legs gave out again when she was perhaps 20 yards away. She crawled. Actually got down on her hands and knees and crawled through the snow like an animal, her wedding dress, her mother's wedding dress, dragging behind her, probably ruined, definitely ruined. But what did that matter if she was alive? The porch steps appeared before her like a miracle. She pulled herself up them one at a time, reached the door, raised her fist, a hand she could no longer feel, and pounded against the wood with the last of her strength. "Help!" she tried to call, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please, help!" She pounded again, and this time she felt something tear, the skin of her knuckles, she thought, though there was no pain. The door remained closed. Clara's vision darkened at the edges. She was going to die here, she realized, on a stranger's porch, wearing a dead woman's wedding dress, 20 yards from warmth and safety. The irony was almost funny. She pitched forward against the door, her weight making a final desperate thump against the wood. Then the door opened. Clara fell through it, landing hard on what felt like wooden floorboards, warm air rushing over her like an embrace. "What in the A man's voice, deep, startled. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" Strong hands rolled her over. Clara tried to focus on the face above her, but everything was blurry, shadows and light swimming together. "You're frozen solid," the voice said, and there was something in it. Concern? Alarm? "How long were you out there? Never mind. Don't try to talk. Just hold on." She was being lifted, carried. The warmth was almost painful after so much cold, making her skin burn and ache. "What's happening, Pa? Who is that?" A younger voice. A boy. "Don't know yet. Get blankets. All of them. And stoke the fire higher." "Should I ride for Doc? In this storm. You wouldn't make it to the road. Just get the blankets. Move." Clara was set down on something soft. A sofa, maybe. Hands worked at her wet clothes, and she wanted to protest. She should protest. This wasn't proper, but she couldn't make her mouth form words. "This dress is soaked through," the man muttered, "frozen in places. What kind of fool goes out in a blizzard in a wedding dress?" Wedding dress. The words penetrated the fog in Clara's mind. He was right. She must look absurd. A 43-year-old woman playing dress-up, pretending she could still be a bride. The tears came then, hot against her frozen cheeks. "Hey now. Hey, it's all right. You're safe now. Whatever happened, you're safe." But she wasn't safe. She'd never be safe again. Safety required money or protection or a place in the world, and she had none of those things. She was a woman alone with nothing and nowhere to go. And even if she survived this night, what then? Where would she be tomorrow or the day after? "Got the blankets, Pa." "Good boy. Help me wrap her. Gentle now. Her skin's like ice. We need to warm her slow or we'll do more damage." Clara felt herself being cocooned in fabric, heavy wool that smelled of cedar and smoke. The shivering started then, violent tremors that shook her entire body. "That's good," the man said. "Shivering's good. Means she's warming up. We need to get something hot into her. Coffee? No, too much. Weak tea. And warm it first. Don't make it hot." Footsteps retreated. Clara managed to open her eyes, blinking against the blurriness. The room came into focus slowly. A large sitting area with a stone fireplace, flames dancing behind an iron grate. Solid furniture, handmade but well-crafted. Bookshelves. A rifle mounted above the mantel. The ceiling beams were exposed, showing quality construction, and leaning over her was the man who'd pulled her from the storm. He was perhaps 40, maybe a few years older, with dark hair going gray at the temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting against sun and wind. His face was weathered, but not unkind. Strong features that might have been handsome if they weren't set in such serious lines. He wore work clothes, clean but worn, and his hands were rough when they touched her forehead, checking for fever. "Can you talk?" he asked. "Tell me your name." Clara." The word came out through chattering teeth. "Clara W. Whitmore." "All right, Clara Whitmore. I'm Caleb Mercer. This is my ranch. You're safe here. Do you understand? You're safe." Safe. That word again. She wanted to laugh, but feared it would come out as a sob. A boy appeared at Caleb's shoulder, perhaps 16, with his father's dark hair and a face still holding on to the softness of youth. He held a steaming cup carefully. "This warm enough, Pa?" Caleb tested it with his finger and nodded. "Perfect. Help me sit her up." Between them, they raised Clara to a sitting position, though her body didn't want to cooperate, didn't want to do anything but shake. The cup was pressed to her lips. Small sips, Caleb instructed. Let it warm you from the inside. The tea was weak and sweet, probably with honey added. Clara sipped obediently, feeling the warmth trace a line down her throat and into her stomach. After a few moments, the shivering began to ease, though her hands still trembled when she tried to hold the cup herself. I've got it, Caleb said, keeping his hand over hers to steady the cup. Just drink. She did, draining half of it before her stomach rebelled slightly, unused to anything warm after so much cold. That's enough for now, Caleb said, setting the cup aside. Clara, I need to know, were you alone out there? Is anyone else lost in the storm? The question brought everything flooding back. Pike, probably still passed out in the wagon, or maybe frozen to death by now. And Hendricks, warm and comfortable in his house, probably not sparing her a single thought. Driver, she managed. Wagon, maybe 2 miles? He was drinking, passed out. I walked. Caleb's jaw tightened. 2 miles in this storm. You shouldn't have made 20 yards, much less 2 miles. That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever heard. Foolish, Clara said. Definitely foolish. Well, you're alive, so that counts for something. He glanced at the boy. Thomas, check the barn. Make sure all the stock's secured. This storm's not letting up anytime soon. Yes, sir. The boy, Thomas, gave Clara one more curious look before heading for the door, pulling on a heavy coat as he went. Alone with Caleb, Clara felt suddenly acutely aware of her situation. She was in a strange man's house, wearing nothing but blankets, with no money, no prospects, and no way to leave even if she'd had somewhere to go. Thank you, she said quietly, for not leaving me on the porch. Something flickered in Caleb's expression, surprise maybe, or sadness. What kind of man would I be if I left a woman to freeze to death on my doorstep? A practical one? The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. I'm told my presence is inconvenient. Who told you that? Clara looked away toward the fire. It doesn't matter. It does if it's the reason you ended up in my storm wearing a wedding dress. So he had noticed the dress. Of course he had. She probably looked like a madwoman, a pathetic, desperate madwoman who'd dressed up for a wedding that was never going to happen. I came west to marry a rancher, she said, keeping her voice flat. He took one look at me and sent me back. Said I was too old. The driver who was supposed to return me to the station got drunk and passed out. So I walked. That's the whole story. Silence stretched between them. When Clara finally looked back at Caleb, she found him studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What was the rancher's name? Does it matter? It does to me. Any man who'd turn a woman out in a storm is someone I'd like to know about, so I can avoid doing business with him, or so I can have words with him when the weather clears. Your choice. Clara blinked. You'd confront him? For me? You don't even know me. I know you're a woman who survived a blizzard in a wedding dress. I know whoever sent you back out into that storm is lower than a snake's belly. That's enough. Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest, something that wasn't just the tea or the fire or the gradual return of feeling to her extremities. It was the first kindness anyone had shown her in, she couldn't remember how long. James Hendricks, she said. The Broken H Ranch. About 6 miles from here, I think. Caleb's expression darkened. Hendricks. Should have guessed. Man's had 3 mail-order brides in the last 2 years. Never keeps any of them longer than a week. Clara's stomach dropped. 3? But the advertisement said he was widowed, that he was looking for a... He is widowed. Wife died 5 years back, but Margaret Hendricks was a saint, and James has spent the last 5 years trying to find her replacement. Only he measures every woman against a memory and finds them all wanting. Caleb shook his head. You're well rid of him, Mrs. Whitmore. Miss, Clara corrected automatically. It's Miss Whitmore. Miss, then, and you can call me Caleb. We're not formal here. I shouldn't impose on you longer than necessary. When the storm clears, if you could perhaps direct me back to the station. Station's closed until spring. Last train came through 2 weeks ago. Won't be another until the thaw. The words hit like physical blows. Closed? But that's impossible. I have to. What? What did she have to do? Where did she have to go? Back to Philadelphia, where she had no home and no prospects. Back to the boarding house, where she'd spent 10 years growing older and poorer and more invisible. The panic must have shown on her face because Caleb's expression softened. Hey, one problem at a time. Right now, you need to recover from nearly freezing to death. Everything else can wait until morning. I have no money, Clara said, needing him to understand. I spent everything I had getting here. I can't pay you for... Did I ask you to pay me? No, but... Then stop worrying about it. You can stay here until the storm passes and you're strong enough to travel. After that, we'll figure something out. Why? The question burst out of her. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be a thief or a liar or Are you? What? Are you a thief or a liar? No, of course not, but then I guess I'm not taking much of a risk. Caleb stood, moving to add another log to the fire. Look, Miss Whitmore, Clara, I don't know what kind of men you've been dealing with, but out here we take care of each other. It's not charity, it's survival. Winter kills anyone who tries to face it alone. Clara pulled the blankets tighter around herself, trying to process this. In her experience, kindness always came with conditions, always had a price. What do you want in return? Caleb turned from the fire, and for the first time she saw something that might have been hurt in his eyes. Nothing. I want nothing in return except maybe for you to stop looking at me like I'm about to ask you for something terrible. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest, yes, you did. And I suppose you've earned the right to be cautious. But whatever Hendricks did or said to you, I'm not him. You're a guest in my home until you're ready to leave it. That's all. The door opened, bringing a gust of wind and snow, and Thomas stomping his feet. Barn secure, Pa. Stocks all settled, but the temperature's dropping fast. This is going to be a bad one. How bad? Thomas pulled off his coat, shaking snow from the shoulders. Could last days. Maybe longer. Clara's heart sank. Days. She'd be imposing on Caleb Mercer's hospitality for days, with no way to repay him, no way to... Days it is, then, Caleb said calmly. Clara, you'll take my room. I'll bunk with Thomas. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will. The bed's warmer, and you need warmth. Thomas, find some of your smaller clothes for Clara. She can't stay wrapped in blankets forever. Your wife's clothes would fit better, Clara said without thinking, then immediately regretted it when both men went silent. Caleb's face closed off. My wife is dead. Died 2 years ago. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. How could you? He moved toward the hallway. Room's this way. Can you walk? Clara tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Before she could fall, Caleb was there, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight with a strength that made it seem effortless. Easy. Give yourself time. Your body's been through a shock. He helped her down a short hallway to a room that was clearly his, simply furnished with a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table. A window looked out onto white nothingness. Sit, he commanded, guiding her to the bed. Clara sat and immediately felt the exhaustion crash over her. Every muscle ached. Her skin burned and stung as circulation returned. Her head pounded. I'll bring you some stew, Caleb said, and more tea. You need to eat something warm. I don't want to be any trouble. Too late. You're already trouble. But he said it with something that might have been a smile. Might as well be fed trouble instead of starving trouble. He left, closing the door behind him. Alone, Clara looked down at herself. The blankets had fallen partially open, revealing what remained of her mother's wedding dress. The hem was shredded. The bodice was stained with dirt and blood from her torn hands. The delicate lace. She started crying then, really crying, the way she hadn't let herself cry on Hendricks' porch, or in the wagon, or even in the storm. Great gasping sobs that shook her entire body. The dress was ruined. Her dreams were ruined. She was ruined. 43 years old, and she'd gambled everything on a stranger's advertisement, and she'd lost. The door opened quietly. Caleb stood there with a bowl of stew and a fresh cup of tea, taking in the sight of her tears without comment. He set the food on the bedside table, then, to her surprise, sat down on the edge of the bed. The dress can probably be salvaged, he said quietly. Thomas's mother, my wife Sarah, she was good with a needle, taught Thomas some before she passed. He could help you mend it when you're feeling stronger. It's not about the dress, Clara whispered. I know. I was so stupid. Coming all this way for a man I'd never met, thinking he'd take one look at me and see, I don't know, something worth keeping. Hendrix is a fool. Clara laughed through her tears. He's practical. I am too old to have children, too old to be pretty, too old to be anything but a burden. You survived a blizzard that would have killed most men half your age. Doesn't sound like a burden to me. Sounds like a survivor. She looked at him then, really looked at him. The lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the calluses on his hands. He was, she guessed, only a few years younger than she was. And he'd lost his wife. He knew about dreams dying. How do you bear it? She asked. The loneliness, the loss. How do you keep going? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You get up every morning because the cattle don't care that your heart's broken. You work because work's what keeps you sane. You take care of your son because he's counting on you. And some days that's enough. Some days it has to be. And the other days? The other days are harder. He stood, moving toward the door. Eat your stew. Try to rest. And Clara? Yes? You're not a burden, and you're not too old. You're just with the wrong people. When you're with the right people, age doesn't matter. Only character does. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Clara sat alone in the warm room, looking at the bowl of stew, simple but hearty, steam rising from its surface, and felt something shift inside her. She was alive. Against all odds, against all reason, she was alive. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. She picked up the bowl and started to eat. Outside, the storm raged on. The stew settled warm in Clara's stomach, and for the first time in what felt like days, she could think clearly. The room around her, Caleb's room, was spare but clean, with none of the elaborate furnishings she'd seen in wealthy Philadelphia homes. Everything here served a purpose. The heavy quilt on the bed wasn't decorative, it was built for warmth. The chest of drawers wasn't polished mahogany, it was solid pine, scarred with use. Even the single painting on the wall, a landscape of mountains she didn't recognize, looked homemade, probably painted by someone who'd lived here. She finished the stew and set the bowl aside, then lay back against the pillows. Sleep came faster than she expected, pulling her down into darkness before she could protest. When she woke, gray light filtered through the window. The storm still raged outside, snow driving sideways across the glass. Clara pushed herself upright, wincing at the aches that had settled into her muscles overnight. Her hands were bandaged. She touched the wrappings carefully, wondering when that had happened. Caleb must have come in while she slept. On the chair beside the bed sat a neat pile of clothes. Men's work shirts and trousers, smaller than what Caleb would wear. Thomas's clothes, she realized. There was also a basin of water on the dresser, still faintly warm, and a cloth folded beside it. Clara stood shakily and moved to the basin. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser made her catch her breath. Her face was wind-burned, her lips cracked, and her hair hung in tangles around her shoulders. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd nearly died in a blizzard. She washed as best she could, working carefully around the bandages on her hands. Then she dressed in the borrowed clothes, rolling up the sleeves and cuffs that were still too long for her frame. The trousers required a belt pulled tight, and the shirt hung loose, but they were warm and dry, and that was more than she'd had yesterday. When she opened the bedroom door, the smell of coffee and frying bacon drew her down the hallway. The house was warmer now, the fire clearly stoked high against the cold. Voices came from what must be the kitchen. Can't just keep her here indefinitely, Pa. What are people going to say? Let them say what they want. Woman nearly died on our doorstep. We're not turning her out before she's recovered. I didn't mean that. I just meant, well, she can't stay in your room forever, and you and me in the bunk room ain't exactly comfortable. Clara paused in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt but unable to avoid hearing. We'll manage, Caleb said firmly. Few days at most until the storm breaks. Then we'll figure out what comes next. What if she don't have anywhere to go? What if she wants to stay? A long pause. Then Caleb's voice, quieter. Cross that bridge when we come to it. Clara knocked lightly on the doorframe. Both men turned, and she saw relief flash across Caleb's face. "You're up." "Good. How are you feeling?" "Sore," Clara admitted, "but alive, thanks to you." Thomas pulled out a chair at the large wooden table that dominated the kitchen. "Sit down, ma'am. Coffee's fresh." Clara sat, accepting the cup Caleb poured for her. The kitchen was clearly the heart of the house, larger than the sitting room, with a massive cast-iron stove, open shelves lined with provisions, and windows that would probably let in good light when there wasn't a blizzard raging outside. Everything was clean but showed signs of constant use. This was a working kitchen, not a showpiece. "Bacon?" Caleb asked, already forking strips onto a plate. "I shouldn't impose on your provisions." "You're eating," he said, setting the plate in front of her. "No arguments. You need to rebuild your strength." The bacon was crispy, the way she liked it. Clara ate slowly, aware of both men watching her with concern that would have been touching if it wasn't also slightly embarrassing. "Thank you for the bandages," she said, holding up her hands. "I don't even remember you doing it." "You were pretty far gone," Caleb said. "Frostbite on the fingers, cuts from, I'm guessing from falling? You had scrapes on your palms, too." "I crawled," Clara said quietly. "The last bit, when my legs wouldn't work anymore." Thomas's eyes widened. "You crawled through a blizzard?" "I didn't have much choice. It was that or freeze to death in the snow." "Most people would have just given up," the boy said. Clara sipped her coffee, remembering that moment when she'd wanted to do exactly that, when lying down in the soft snow had seemed easier than taking another step. "I almost did. Then I got mad instead." Caleb smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, taking years off and making him look almost boyish. "Mad's good. Mad keeps you alive when nothing else will." "What were you mad at?" Thomas asked. Clara considered the question. "Everything. The man who turned me away, the driver who abandoned me, myself for being foolish enough to come out here in the first place. But mostly I was mad at the idea of dying before I'd really lived. 43 years of existing, and what did I have to show for it? I'd be damned if I was going to let that be the end of my story." The words hung in the air. Caleb had gone very still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "43's not old," he said finally. "Try telling that to James Hendricks." "Hendricks is an idiot, and I don't usually speak ill of my neighbors, but in his case, I'll make an exception." Clara managed a small laugh. "You barely know me. How do you know I'm not the problem? Maybe I'm difficult. Maybe I'm unpleasant to live with. Maybe I snore." "Do you? Do I what?" "Snore." I don't know. I've never had anyone to tell me." The admission came out more pathetic than she'd intended. Thomas looked uncomfortable, but Caleb just nodded as if she'd said something perfectly ordinary. "Well, if you do, we'll let you know. In the meantime, tell me what you did back in Philadelphia, before you came west." Clara wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. "I was a seamstress, mostly mending and alterations, some custom work when I could get it. Spent the last 10 years in a boarding house, taking in work from the neighborhood." "Any good at it?" "I'm excellent at it," Clara said, feeling a spark of pride. "My stitches are small and even. I can match fabric so the repair is invisible. I once took a dress that had been torn nearly in half and put it back together so perfectly the woman who owned it couldn't find the seam." "Sounds like a useful skill out here," Caleb said. "Ranch works hard on clothes. Always something that needs mending." Clara looked at him sharply, trying to determine if he was offering her work or just making conversation. But his expression was neutral, focused on his breakfast. "I'd be happy to help with mending," she said carefully, "to earn my keep while I'm here." "You don't need to earn anything, but if you want something to do with your hands, I won't say no. Lord knows Thomas and I have let the mending pile up." Thomas grinned. "That's an understatement. Got shirts with holes you could put your fist through." "Well, I can't have that," Clara said, feeling something ease in her chest. A purpose, even a small one. "Show me your mending pile after breakfast." The pile turned out to be enormous. A wooden crate in the corner of the sitting room overflowing with torn shirts, pants with blown-out knees, and socks that needed darning. Clara sorted through it with growing disbelief. How long have you been accumulating this? Thomas looked sheepish. Ma used to handle it. After she passed, Pa and I sort of let it slide. For 2 years? We kept meaning to hire someone from town, but Caleb trailed off. Never got around to it. Clara held up a shirt that was more whole than fabric. This is beyond repair. This needs to be turned into rags. That's my Sunday shirt, Thomas protested. Not anymore, it isn't. But I can make you a new one if you have fabric. In the chest upstairs, Caleb said. Sarah kept a good stock of supplies. Never got used after, well, feel free to use whatever you need. Clara caught the pain that flickered across his face when he mentioned his wife. She wanted to ask about her, what she'd been like, how she'd died, but it seemed too intrusive. Instead, she focused on the practical. I'll need scissors, needles, thread, a good light to work by. All in the sewing chest upstairs. I'll show you. The room upstairs had clearly belonged to Sarah Mercer. Unlike Caleb's Spartan bedroom, this one had touches of feminine comfort. Lace curtains at the window, a quilt in a wedding ring pattern on the bed, a small writing desk in the corner. The sewing chest sat beside the window, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship with multiple drawers and compartments. Clara opened it reverently. Inside was everything a serious seamstress could want. Scissors in 3 different sizes, needles of every gauge, spools of thread in dozens of colors, carefully folded fabric, even a pincushion shaped like a tomato. Everything organized with a care that spoke of someone who'd loved their craft. She was very skilled, Clara said softly. She was talented at a lot of things, Caleb said from the doorway. Sewing, cooking, keeping the books for the ranch. Could read and write better than most men. Taught Thomas his letters when he was small. How did she... Lord Clara let the question trail off. Not sure if she had the right to ask, but Caleb answered anyway. Fever. Came on sudden one winter. Gone in 3 days. We'd have ridden for the doctor, but the roads were impassable. Snow too deep. By the time we could have gotten help, it was too late. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Clara could hear the pain underneath. She died in that bed. Haven't been able to sleep in this room since. I'm so sorry. Life on a ranch. People die. Storms come. You survive or you don't. He turned to leave, then paused. Use whatever you need from her things. She'd want them used, not sitting up here gathering dust. Clara spent the rest of the morning setting up a workspace by the sitting room fire. She carried down the sewing chest and several pieces of fabric, then sorted the mending pile into categories: simple repairs, major reconstruction, and hopeless cases destined for the rag bag. The work was soothing. Her hands knew what to do without her having to think about it, letting her mind wander while her fingers moved through familiar motions. Thread the needle, not the end. Small, even stitches. Pull tight, but not too tight. Thomas came in around midday, stamping snow from his boots. Still coming down hard out there. Pa's checking on the cattle, making sure they can get to shelter. In this weather? Cattle don't care about weather. They need tending regardless. He sat down near the fire, warming his hands. What are you working on? Clara held up the shirt. Replacing this button, mending this tear, and reinforcing this seam that's coming apart. Whose is it? Pa's. That's his winter work shirt. He's hard on his clothes. He's hard on everything. Works from before dawn to after dark most days. Ma used to tell him he'd work himself to death if she didn't make him stop for meals. Clara set down the shirt, looking at the boy. He had an open, honest face, with none of his father's guardedness. You miss her. Every day. Thomas poked at the fire with an iron rod. House got real quiet after she died. Pa doesn't talk much anymore. Used to, he'd laugh and joke around. Now he just works. Grief does that to people. You ever lost anyone? Clara thought of her mother, dead 15 years now. Her father, gone before that. The few friends she'd made in Philadelphia who'd drifted away when she couldn't afford to keep up with their social circles. Everyone loses someone eventually. It's how we know we loved them. Thomas considered this. Pa won't talk about Ma. Gets this look on his face like it hurts too much, so I stopped asking. But sometimes I see him looking at her picture, the one in his room, and his face. The boy trailed off. I wish he'd find someone else. Not to replace Ma, but just so he wouldn't be so lonely. That's not something you can force, Clara said gently. When he's ready, he'll know. What about you? You ever been married? No. Ever come close? Clara smiled sadly. Once. A long time ago. He was a clerk in my father's office. We courted for almost a year. Then my father died. The business failed, and suddenly I had no dowry and no prospects. He married a banker's daughter 6 months later. That's terrible. That's practical. I learned young that romance is a luxury poor people can't afford. Then why'd you come west to marry a stranger? The question hit harder than Thomas probably intended. Clara focused on threading her needle, taking her time with the answer. Because I'm 43 years old and I've spent my entire life being practical, being careful, making sensible choices. And where did it get me? Alone in a boarding house, growing old with nothing to show for it but sore fingers and a pile of other people's mending. So I decided to be impractical for once, to take a chance, to see if maybe there was something more out there than just existing. And you ended up nearly frozen to death in my front yard. Clara laughed, surprised at how good it felt. Yes, not exactly the fairy tale ending I was hoping for. Maybe it's not the ending. Maybe it's just the middle. The simple wisdom of that statement caught Clara off guard. She looked at Thomas, really looked at him, and saw a young man who'd learned too much about loss too early, but who still had hope. It humbled her. Maybe you're right, she said softly. The door opened and Caleb came in on a gust of wind and snow, his coat white with accumulated powder. He shook it off before stepping fully inside, hanging the coat on a peg by the door. How's the stock? Thomas asked. Surviving. Lost sight of the barn twice on the way back. This storm's a monster. Caleb's eyes found Clara. You should have seen it 2 years ago when... He stopped abruptly. When Sarah died? Clara finished quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yeah, similar storm. Maybe worse. Pa, Clara's got a question about fabric, Thomas said, clearly trying to change the subject. From Ma's chest. I don't actually have a question, Clara protested. Yes, you do. About whether she can use the blue calico for my new shirt. Clara shot the boy a look, but played along. The blue would make a nice shirt, if that's all right with you, Caleb. It's fine. Use whatever you want. Caleb moved to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth. Thomas, we need to bring in more firewood before dark. This storm might last another day or two. Another 2 days? Clara felt her stomach drop. But I've already imposed on you for... You haven't imposed, Caleb interrupted. And even if you had, what exactly do you suggest? That we send you back out into a blizzard? No, of course not. I just meant, I don't want to be a burden. Caleb turned to face her fully. You're mending a mountain of clothes that needed mending anyway. You're making my son a new shirt. How exactly is that being a burden? I'm eating your food, sleeping in your bed, taking up space. This house has plenty of space. We've got food enough for 12 people through the winter. And the bed was sitting empty anyway. He crossed his arms. If you're so determined to feel guilty, I can't stop you. But I can tell you it's a waste of energy. Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. He was right. She was so accustomed to apologizing for her existence that she'd forgotten how to simply accept kindness. Thank you, she said instead. For everything. Caleb's expression softened. You're welcome. Now, are you going to finish that shirt, or are you going to keep finding reasons to feel bad about being alive? Despite herself, Clara smiled. I'll finish the shirt. Good. Because I'm running out of clothes without holes in them. That evening, after a dinner of venison stew and fresh bread that Caleb had somehow managed to bake despite everything else, Clara sat by the fire with her mending while the two men played cards at the kitchen table. Their voices drifted to her, Caleb's low and measured, Thomas's more animated, and she found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. This was what a home felt like, she realized. Not just walls and a roof, but the warmth of people who cared for each other, the easy rhythm of domestic life, the sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. She'd never had this. Her childhood home had been cold, formal, ruled by her father's strict expectations. The boarding house had been a collection of strangers sharing space, nothing more. She dreamed of having a home, but somewhere along the way she'd convinced herself that dream was for other people. Younger people, prettier people, people who hadn't made the mistakes she'd made. Clara? She looked up to find both men watching her. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "You looked a million miles away." "Just thinking," she said, "about how strange life is. 2 days ago, I was on a train heading toward what I thought would be my future. Now I'm here, in a place I never knew existed, with people I'd never met. If you told me this was how things would turn out, I'd never have believed you." "Regret coming west?" Clara considered the question carefully. "Ask me again when I'm not wearing borrowed clothes and nursing frostbitten fingers. But honestly, no. Even if nothing else comes of this, at least I tried. At least I took the chance." "That's brave," Thomas said. "Or stupid," Clara countered. "Can be both," Caleb said. "Most brave things are a little stupid. Otherwise everyone would do them." "Is that wisdom from experience?" "It's wisdom from watching stupid people do brave things and surviving to tell about it." He set down his cards. "Thomas, time for bed." "Aw, Pa." "Don't aw-paw me. Early start tomorrow. Storm or no storm, the animals need tending." Thomas grumbled but obeyed, saying goodnight to Clara before heading upstairs. Alone with Caleb, Clara suddenly felt self-conscious. She focused on her sewing, keeping her hands busy. "He's a good boy," she said. "He is. Sarah raised him right before she couldn't anymore. I've tried to continue what she started, but there are things a boy needs from a mother that a father can't give. He seems to be turning out fine. He's lonely, talks to the horses more than people sometimes. Ranch life's isolated, especially in winter." Clara understood that kind of loneliness. "Do you ever think about leaving, going somewhere with more people?" "Every day for the first year after Sarah died. Thought about selling everything, taking Thomas back east, starting over." Caleb stirred the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "But this ranch is everything Sarah and I built together. Walking away would feel like losing her all over again." "So you stay." "So I stay, and I work, and I try to be enough for Thomas, even though I know I'm not." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep in Clara. "You're more than enough. Any boy would be lucky to have a father who cared as much as you do." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "Sarah would have liked you. She was practical too. Didn't suffer fools, but she had a kind heart under all that common sense. I wish I could have known her." "Maybe you do, in a way. You're using her things, sitting in her chair by the fire. This house hasn't felt this alive since she died." Clara's hands stilled on the fabric. "I don't want to intrude on her memory." "You're not." Caleb stood, moving toward the window to look out at the still raging storm. "Sarah wouldn't want this place to be a shrine. She'd want it to be a home, full of life and noise and people. She'd be happy someone's using her things instead of letting them gather dust." "You still love her very much." "I'll always love her. She was everything. My best friend, my partner, the person who made me better than I was alone." He turned from the window. "But she's gone. And the living have to keep living. That's what she'd say if she were here." Clara set down her sewing. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are you being so kind to me? Really? Most men wouldn't have taken in a strange woman during a blizzard. They'd have, I don't know, made different arrangements." Caleb returned to his chair, sitting heavily. "You want the honest answer?" "Please?" "Because when I opened that door and saw you lying there dying in the snow, I saw myself. Not literally, but after Sarah died, I spent months just going through the motions, working myself to exhaustion so I wouldn't have to think, shutting out everyone who tried to help. I was dying too, just slower. And if someone hadn't reached out to me, who reached out? Sarah's sister, Margaret. She came from town, forced her way into this house, and told me I was being a selfish fool, that I had a son who needed me, a ranch that needed me, and that crawling into a grave with Sarah wasn't going to bring her back." He smiled sadly. "She was right. Didn't make it easier, but she was right." "Is she still in town?" "Remarried and moved to California last year. But before she left, she made me promise that if I ever saw someone who needed help the way I'd needed it, I wouldn't turn them away." He met Clara's eyes. "When I saw you on my doorstep, I remembered that promise. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just get better. Get stronger. And when you're ready to figure out what comes next, we'll figure it out together. Together? You think I'm going to nurse you back from the brink of death just to abandon you when the storm clears? Give me some credit. The tears spilled over then. Clara wiped at them roughly, embarrassed by the display of emotion. I'm sorry. I'm not usually so... I don't usually cry. Then you're overdue. Caleb stood, moving to the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll look through Sarah's books. She had ledgers from when she managed the ranch accounts. Might give you an idea of what life out here really involves. Help you decide what you want to do. He left before Clara could respond, climbing the stairs to the room he now shared with his son. Clara sat alone by the dying fire, holding a shirt she'd been mending, thinking about choices and chances and the strange paths life took. 3 days ago, she'd been Clara Whitmore, desperate spinster chasing a last chance at marriage. 2 days ago, she'd been a woman dying in the snow. Yesterday, she'd been a stranger in a borrowed bed. Tonight, she was beginning to feel like something else, something she couldn't quite name yet, but it felt like possibility, like hope. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The storm howled outside, but inside the fire crackled softly, warming a house that had been cold for too long. The storm broke on the 4th day, leaving the world outside transformed into a landscape of white silence. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching the sun rise over snow that sparkled like scattered diamonds, and for a moment the beauty of it made her forget everything else. Coffee's ready. She turned to find Caleb already dressed for the day, his hair still damp from washing. He poured 2 cups and handed her one, joining her at the window. Beautiful, isn't it? He said. Deadly beautiful. Hard to believe something so lovely nearly killed me. That's Wyoming for you. Kills you with kindness one day, actual killing the next. Clara smiled, sipping her coffee. Over the past few days, she'd grown accustomed to Caleb's dry humor, the way he'd say something serious in a tone that suggested he was joking, or vice versa. It kept her on her toes, made her think before responding. What happens now? She asked. With the storm over, I mean. Now we dig out. Check on the cattle, see what damage got done. He paused. And I suppose we need to figure out what you want to do. The question Clara had been avoiding. She'd spent 4 days in this house, growing comfortable in a way that terrified her. Comfortable with the rhythm of the work, with Thomas's easy conversation, with Caleb's quiet presence. Comfortable enough that the thought of leaving felt like tearing off a piece of herself. The station's still closed until spring? She asked. Won't open until March at earliest. Snow's too deep in the passes. And I have no money for passage even if it was open. That's a problem, Caleb agreed, but not an unsolvable one. Before Clara could ask what he meant, Thomas thundered down the stairs, already pulling on his coat. Pa, I can see the barn from here. Storm didn't take the roof off after all. Thank heaven for small mercies. Get the path cleared to the barn first, then we'll check on the animals. Thomas grabbed a shovel from beside the door and headed out, his enthusiasm making Clara smile despite her troubled thoughts. He's never seen a storm that bad before, Caleb explained. Worried all night that we'd lose buildings. But you weren't worried. I built those buildings to last. Storm would have to be twice that bad to bring them down. He set down his cup. Clara, we need to talk properly. Clara's stomach tightened. Here it came, the polite dismissal, the gentle pushing toward the door now that she was recovered and the weather had cleared. She braced herself. All right. Caleb gestured toward the kitchen table. They sat across from each other, and Clara noticed he seemed almost nervous, his fingers drumming against the wood surface. You can't go back to Philadelphia, he said bluntly. Not without money, not in winter, probably not at all given what you've told me about your situation there. I know. And you can't stay here indefinitely. People will talk. Already going to talk once word gets out. I had a woman staying in my house during the storm. Clara felt her face heat. I hadn't thought about that. Your reputation. I don't care about my reputation, but I care about yours and I care about Thomas. Boy's 16. Doesn't need people whispering about his father keeping a woman. I understand. I'll leave as soon as... Let me finish. Caleb held up a hand. I have a proposal. A business proposition, really. Clara waited, her heart pounding. This ranch needs help. I need someone who can manage the household, do the cooking and mending, keep the books like Sarah used to. Thomas needs someone who can teach him the things a mother would. Reading and writing beyond the basics, manners, how to talk to people without sounding like he's been raised by wolves. He's not that bad. He tried to eat with his knife last night. Sarah would have had his hide. Caleb leaned forward. Point is, I need help. You need a place to stay and a way to earn your keep, so I'm offering you a job. Housekeeper and tutor for Thomas. Room and board plus a small wage. Nothing fancy, but enough to save up for passage east come spring, if that's what you want. Clara stared at him. You're offering me employment? Unless you've got a better idea. No, I don't have any ideas at all. But Caleb, people will still talk. Unmarried woman living in a house with 2 men, which is why you'd stay in Sarah's room upstairs, the one you've been using, door locks from the inside, and we'd make it clear to everyone in town that you're employed help, nothing more. Would they believe that? Some will, some won't, but that's their problem, not ours. Clara turned the idea over in her mind. It was practical, sensible. It solved her immediate problems and gave her time to figure out what came next. So why did she feel like she was making a mistake? What about James Hendricks, she asked. When he finds out I am staying at a neighboring ranch, let him find out. Man has no claim on you. Never did, frankly, given he threw you out before any vows were said. He might spread rumors, say I was unsuitable, that I ran off to you. Clara, Caleb's voice was firm. Hendricks has gone through 3 mail-order brides in 2 years. Everyone in the territory knows he's the problem, not the women. Nobody's going to believe a word he says against you. You can't know that. I can and do. This is a small community. People know who's trustworthy and who's not. You take the job, work hard, keep your head up, and within a month, folks will accept you as part of the landscape. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that frightened her. Can I think about it? She asked. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or hurt, but he nodded. Of course you can. Take all the time you need, but the offer stands either way. He left to help Thomas with the digging, and Clara sat alone at the table, staring into her coffee cup as if it might hold answers. The sensible thing was to say yes. She had no other options, no other resources. This was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Only a fool would refuse it. But accepting meant staying in this house, growing more attached to this life, to these people. It meant risking her heart on something that might not work out. It meant being brave in a way she hadn't been brave in years. She was still sitting there an hour later when someone knocked at the door. Clara jumped, startled. She wasn't expecting visitors, and surely Caleb and Thomas would just walk in. Moving to the window, she peered out and saw a wagon in the yard, a woman climbing down from the driver's seat. Clara opened the door cautiously. The woman was perhaps 60, solidly built, with iron gray hair and eyes that looked like they didn't miss much. She wore practical clothes and carried a basket over one arm. You must be the bride who wasn't, she said without preamble. I'm Martha Cunningham, own the general store in Sweetwater Station. Clara's face flushed. News travels fast. News is about the only thing that does travel out here. Can I come in, or are we going to chat on the porch in freezing weather? Clara stepped back, letting Martha enter. The older woman set her basket on the table and began unpacking it. Fresh bread, a jar of preserves, what looked like knitted socks. Heard you nearly died in the storm, Martha said, her hands busy. Figured you'd need some things. These socks are good wool. Keep your feet warm. That's very kind, but I can't pay you. Did I ask for payment? No, I did not. Martha fixed Clara with a stern look. Out here, we help each other. You'll return the favor someday when someone else needs it. That's how it works. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. Again, she seemed to cry more in 4 days at this ranch than she had in the previous 4 years. Thank you, she managed. Martha's expression softened. Sit down, girl. You look like you're about to fall over. They sat at the table, and Martha poured herself coffee without asking, making herself at home in Caleb's kitchen like she'd done it 100 times before. Known Caleb and Thomas since they came to this territory, Martha said. Watched Sarah build this ranch from nothing. Nearly broke me when she died. That woman was tougher than rawhide but had a heart soft as butter for anyone in need. Everyone speaks so highly of her because she was worth speaking highly of. But she's gone. And Caleb's been half dead himself ever since. That boy Thomas has been trying to hold everything together, and it's too much for a child to carry. Clara wasn't sure what to say to that. Martha studied her over the rim of her coffee cup. Heard Hendricks turned you out. Man's a fool and a coward, and I told him so to his face last time he came to my store. You did? Certainly did. Told him if he ran off one more woman, I'd stop extending him credit. See how he likes that come spring when he needs supplies. Despite everything, Clara smiled. I imagine he didn't take that well. He sputtered like a fish out of water, then stomped out. Haven't seen him since, which suits me fine. Martha leaned forward. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Are you planning to stay? I don't know. Caleb offered me a job, but you're scared. The blunt assessment hit home. Yes. Of what? Him? Because if Caleb Mercer has shown you anything but perfect respect, I'll— No, Clara said quickly. No, he's been nothing but kind. It's not that. It's just, I came here looking for one thing and found something completely different. I don't know if I can trust it. Don't know if I can trust myself. Martha was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentler. Let me tell you something about this territory. It's hard land for hard people. The weak don't last. The foolish don't last. The ones who can't adapt don't last. But the ones who do last, the ones who dig in and decide to build something here, they become something stronger than they ever were before. I'm not strong. You walked 2 miles through a blizzard that should have killed you. You're stronger than you think. Martha stood, collecting her basket. Take the job. Stay the winter. If come spring you want to leave, leave. But give yourself a chance to see what you're made of first. After Martha left, Clara stood at the window, watching the wagon disappear down the snow-covered road. The woman's words echoed in her mind. Give yourself a chance. When had she last done that? Given herself a real chance at something, rather than just accepting whatever scraps life threw her way. The door opened and Caleb came in, stamping snow from his boots. Saw Martha's wagon. She give you trouble? No, she brought supplies and advice. Martha's always free with advice, whether you want it or not. He moved to the stove, warming his hands. What'd she say? Clara took a breath. She said I should take your job offer. And I'm saying yes, if the offer's still open. Caleb turned to face her fully, and the relief on his face was unmistakable. It's open. When can you start? I already have, haven't I? Been doing the mending for days now. That was different. That was you being helpful. This is employment, which means we need to discuss terms properly. He gestured toward the table. Sit. They spent the next hour working out details. Clara would receive room and board plus $15 a month, more than she'd made in Philadelphia, she realized with shock. Her duties would include cooking, cleaning, mending, keeping the ranch books, and helping educate Thomas. In return, she'd have her own room, Sundays off, and the freedom to leave whenever she chose. That last part's important, Caleb emphasized. You're not indentured here. You're employed. If it doesn't work out, either of us can end the arrangement with 2 weeks' notice. That seems fair? Good. Then we're agreed. He held out his hand. Clara shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. This was real. She had a job, a place to live, a purpose. There's one more thing, Caleb said. We need to go into town. Let people see you with me and Thomas. Let them know the situation. Otherwise, rumors will build up worse than if we face them head on. Clara's stomach twisted. How soon? Soon as the roads are passable. 2-3 days, maybe. The thought of facing an entire town full of strangers who'd heard about her humiliation made Clara want to hide under the bed, but she forced herself to nod. All right, I'll be ready. That evening, after dinner, Caleb brought down Sarah's ledgers. They were detailed, meticulous records of every penny that had come in or gone out of the ranch over 5 years. Clara studied them with growing respect for the woman who'd kept them. She was very organized, Clara said. She kept everything balanced to the penny. I've been doing my best since she died, but numbers aren't my strong suit. Clara could see that. The entries for the past 2 years were messier, some calculations wrong, a few debts not properly recorded. This supplier here, she pointed, you've been overcharged 3 times, see? The rate should be steady, but they've added extra fees. Caleb leaned over her shoulder to look. I'll be damned, never even noticed. And this loan payment, you've been paying more than you need to. The terms here say 6% interest, but they've been charging you 8. Can you fix it? I can draft letters pointing out the errors. Whether they refund you is another matter. Worth a try. Sarah would have caught these mistakes immediately. I've probably been bleeding money for 2 years and didn't even know it. Clara felt a surge of satisfaction. This was something she could do, something useful and concrete. I'll go through everything systematically, make sure the accounts are current and accurate. That'd be a help, a real help. Caleb straightened. I'm going to check on Thomas. Make sure he's actually studying and not just staring at his books. After he left, Clara worked through the ledgers, making notes, calculating, organizing. The work was absorbing enough that she didn't notice time passing until Thomas appeared with a question about his reading. Pa says you're staying, the boy said, hovering in the doorway. Working for us proper. That's right. Good. I was hoping you would. Clara smiled at him. Were you? House is better with you here. Feels more like, I don't know. More like it used to, maybe. The simple honesty of it touched Clara deeply. I'll do my best to earn my keep. You already do. Pa's been smiling more. Haven't seen him smile much since Ma died. Had he been smiling? Clara tried to think back over the past few days. Maybe there had been more smiles than she'd noticed, more moments of lightness. Or maybe Thomas was seeing what he wanted to see, a lonely boy hoping for something to fill the gap his mother had left. Either way, Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. These 2 males, man and boy, were trusting her with something precious. Their home, their routine, their grief. She couldn't fail them. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The roads cleared slowly, and Caleb spent long hours checking on the cattle, assessing damage, making repairs. Clara threw herself into organizing the household, working from dawn until late evening. She scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed, organized the pantry, finished the mountain of mending, and started on the books. Thomas proved to be a willing student once she engaged his interest. He could read adequately, but had never been pushed to comprehend deeper meanings. Clara started having him read aloud, then discuss what he'd read, asking questions that made him think rather than just recite. Why do you think the character did that? She'd ask. Because the book says he did? But what was his motivation? What did he hope to gain? Thomas would furrow his brow, thinking hard, and slowly his answers became more thoughtful, more nuanced. Ma used to ask questions like that, he said one evening. Made me think instead of just memorizing. Your mother was a good teacher. She was good at everything. Pa says I got her brains and his stubbornness, which is either the best combination or the worst. Clara laughed. Probably depends on the day. On the 4th morning after the storm, Caleb announced it was time to go to town. Clara's hands trembled as she dressed in her best clothes, which weren't much, just a simple gray dress she'd mended and pressed until it looked almost respectable. She pinned up her hair carefully, trying to look proper and professional. Not like a desperate woman who'd come west to find a husband. Not like someone who'd nearly died in a blizzard. Just like a housekeeper. Respectable employment. Nothing scandalous. The ride to town took nearly 2 hours, the wagon moving slowly through snow-packed roads. Thomas chattered about nothing in particular, filling the silence, while Caleb drove with his usual quiet competence. Sweetwater Station was smaller than Clara expected, maybe 30 buildings clustered around a main street, with the train station at one end and a church at the other. Everything looked clean and well-maintained despite the snow. Caleb pulled up in front of the general store. Martha's first, he said. She'll spread the word faster than anyone. Inside, the store was warm and crowded with people getting supplies after the storm. Conversation stopped when they entered, all eyes turning toward Clara. She wanted to run, but Caleb's hand settled on her lower back, not possessive, just steadying, and Martha's voice rang out from behind the counter. Well, look who's here! Caleb Mercer, and you must have brought your new housekeeper. Clara, isn't it? The emphasis on housekeeper was deliberate, Clara realized. Martha was establishing the narrative before anyone else could. Yes, ma'am, Clara said, grateful her voice didn't shake. Clara Whitmore. Pleased to have you in town proper. Heard you're helping out at the Mercer Ranch. Good thing, too. Those two have been drowning in bachelor housekeeping for too long. A few people chuckled. The tension in the room eased fractionally. A woman stepped forward, thin, elegant, with calculating eyes. Martha, aren't you going to introduce us properly? I'm Caroline Fletcher. My husband owns the bank. There was something in her tone that Clara didn't like, a sharpness beneath the politeness. Mrs. Fletcher, Clara said with a small nod. How interesting that you found employment so quickly after your disappointment with Mr. Hendricks. There it was, the knife, sliding in smooth and quick. Mr. Hendricks and I were never engaged, Clara said clearly. I answered an advertisement. He decided I wasn't suitable. I moved on. Now I'm employed at the Mercer Ranch as housekeeper and tutor for Thomas. How convenient, Caroline said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Yes, it is, Caleb said, his voice flat. Convenient for me, since I needed help. Convenient for Clara, since she needed work. Convenient all around, wouldn't you say, Caroline? The use of her first name, slightly presumptuous in the formal setting, made the woman blink. Of course. I meant no offense. None taken, Caleb said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have shopping to do. He guided Clara toward the back of the store, where Martha was already assembling supplies. Don't mind Caroline, Martha said quietly. Woman's got more teeth than sense, and she loves stirring up trouble. But most folks here are decent. Give them time to get to know you. Over the next hour, Clara met a dozen people. Some were friendly, like the pastor's wife, who welcomed her warmly. Some were neutral, reserving judgment. A few, like Caroline Fletcher, were openly suspicious. But Caleb and Thomas stayed close, their presence a shield against the worst of it. And slowly, Clara felt herself relaxing. These were just people. Flawed, curious, sometimes judgmental, but just people. They were loading supplies into the wagon when Clara heard a familiar voice. Well, well, the runaway bride. She turned to find James Hendricks standing behind her, his expression smug. Mr. Hendricks, she said coolly, heard you found work. With Mercer, no less. He looked past her to where Caleb was securing the last of the supplies. Moving up in the world, aren't you? From offered bride to hired help. Clara felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Caleb was there. Hendricks, surprised to see you showing your face in town after what you did. What I did? I had every right to refuse an unsuitable match. You had every right to refuse her before she spent her last dollar traveling 1,000 miles. You lured her here under false pretenses, then threw her out into a blizzard. That's not refusing a match. That's attempted murder. Hendricks' face darkened. Now you watch what you're saying, Mercer. Or what? You'll turn me out in a storm, too? Caleb stepped closer. You're lucky Clara's more forgiving than I am. Otherwise, I'd have already paid you a visit to discuss your business practices. My business is my own concern. Your business becomes everyone's concern when you start endangering women. Martha's already cut off your credit. Want to see how many other merchants do the same once word spreads about what you did? Hendricks looked around. People had stopped to watch the confrontation, and the expressions on their faces weren't friendly. He seemed to realize he was losing whatever sympathy he might have had. This isn't over, he muttered. Yes, it is, Caleb said flatly. Clara works for me now. She's under my protection. You come near her again, you'll answer to me. Understand? For a moment, Clara thought Hendricks might actually throw a punch, but then he spun on his heel and stalked away, climbing into his wagon with jerky, angry movements. The crowd dispersed slowly, people returning to their business with backward glances and whispered conversations. Clara found she was shaking. You all right? Caleb asked quietly. I can't believe you did that. Stood up to him like that. Can't believe it took me this long. Man's been treating women like disposable goods for years. Should have been called out long ago. But now he'll be angry. He might cause trouble for you. Let him try. I've got nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. You're my employee. You work hard, you're honest, and you saved me from drowning in a mountain of miscalculated ledgers. That's all anyone needs to know." Thomas appeared, his face flushed with excitement. "Pa, that was amazing. You should have seen Mr. Hendricks's face when you said—" "Thomas," Caleb's voice held a warning, "don't make a show of it." "Yes, sir." But the boy was grinning as he climbed into the wagon. On the ride home, Clara felt something shift inside her. Caleb had defended her, publicly, without hesitation. When was the last time anyone had stood up for her like that? Never, she realized. Not once in her entire life had someone put themselves between her and harm the way Caleb just had. "Thank you," she said quietly. Caleb glanced at her. "For what?" "For what you said to Hendricks, for protecting me." "That's what decent people do, Clara. They protect each other." "Not in my experience." "Then you've been dealing with indecent people. Time to change that." That night, after Thomas had gone to bed and Caleb was doing a final check on the animals, Clara sat by the fire with Sarah's ledgers spread before her. But she couldn't focus on the numbers. Her mind kept replaying the scene in town, Caleb's words, his stance, the way he'd positioned himself between her and Hendricks like it was the most natural thing in the world, under my protection. Those 3 words shouldn't have meant as much as they did. She was an employee, nothing more. Professional relationship, room and board, and $15 a month. But somewhere in the past week, something had changed. Or maybe it had been changing all along, so gradually she hadn't noticed. She trusted Caleb Mercer, trusted him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years, maybe ever. And that terrified her more than the blizzard had, because trust meant vulnerability. It meant risking her heart. It meant opening herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. The door opened and Caleb came in, bringing cold air and the smell of the barn. "Everything secure?" Clara asked. "All settled for the night?" He poured himself coffee, joining her by the fire. "You did good today. In town. Handled yourself well. I wanted to run and hide. But you didn't. That's what counts." He studied her for a moment. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Her heart began to pound. "All right. Are you going to stay? Really stay, I mean. Or are you just marking time until you can leave come spring?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I'm still trying to figure out who I am in this new life." "Fair enough." But she could see disappointment in his eyes. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you going to keep treating me like an employee? Or are we going to acknowledge that something else is happening here?" The words were out before she could stop them. Bold. Too bold. She saw Caleb's eyes widen, his carefully controlled expression crack for just a moment. "Clara, forget I said that. I'm tired. The trip to town was exhausting. I should go to bed." She stood quickly, gathering the ledgers, but Caleb caught her wrist gently. "Don't run away." "I'm not running. I'm being sensible." "Since when has being sensible made anyone happy?" Clara looked down at his hand on her wrist. "Warm, calloused, strong. Since it's all I know how to be." "Then maybe it's time to learn something new." He released her wrist and Clara fled to her room, her heart hammering, her mind spinning. What was she doing? She'd come here for stability, for security, for a chance to build something safe. Not to fall for a widower who was still in love with his dead wife. Not to complicate everything with feelings that had no place in an employer-employee relationship. But lying in Sarah's bed, in Sarah's room, using Sarah's things, Clara couldn't deny the truth anymore. She was already falling, and she had no idea how to stop. Clara avoided being alone with Caleb for the next 3 days. She threw herself into work with an intensity that bordered on manic, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganizing cupboards that were already organized, staying up late with the ledgers long after both men had gone to bed. On the 4th morning, Thomas cornered her in the kitchen. "Did you and Pa have a fight?" he asked bluntly. Clara nearly dropped the pot she was washing. "What? No, why would you think that?" "Because you won't look at him, and he keeps starting to say something to you, then stopping, and yesterday at dinner the silence was so thick I could have cut it with a knife." "We didn't fight, we're just adjusting to the new arrangement." Thomas leaned against the counter, crossing his arms in a gesture that reminded Clara painfully of his father. "You're lying. You're bad at it, but you're lying." "Thomas," Ma used to say that the worst thing two people could do was not talk to each other. She said silence was poison in a house. He fixed Clara with a look far too knowing for 16. "Whatever happened, you should talk about it, before the poison sets in." He left before Clara could respond, grabbing his coat and heading out to help with the morning chores. Clara stood at the sink, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape, Thomas's words echoing in her mind. The boy was right. She knew he was right. But how could she talk to Caleb about feelings she barely understood herself? How could she admit that she was falling for a man who wore his dead wife's memory like armor? The kitchen door opened and Caleb came in alone, stamping snow from his boots. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Thomas is checking the fence line," he said finally. "Won't be back for a couple hours." Clara's heart began to race. "I should start on the bread." "Clara, please, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about. I overstepped the other night. Said things I shouldn't have. Can we just forget it happened?" "Can you?" The quiet question stopped her cold. She turned to face him fully, finding him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm trying to," she said honestly. "That's the problem. So am I. And I can't." Caleb moved closer, stopping a few feet away, maintaining a careful distance. "You asked if I was going to keep treating you like an employee or acknowledge what's happening here. That was a fair question. You deserve a fair answer." Clara's hands twisted in her apron. "You don't owe me any explanations. I'm the one who—" "I loved my wife," Caleb interrupted. "Loved her with everything I had. When she died, I thought that part of me died with her. Thought I'd never feel that way about anyone again." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Caleb, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do, because you're right. Something is happening here. Has been happening since I opened that door and found you half frozen on my porch. And I've been telling myself it's just gratitude or loneliness or the fact that this house feels alive again with you in it. But it's more than that, isn't it?" She couldn't speak, could only nod. "The thing is," Caleb continued, his voice rough, "I don't know if I'm ready for more. Don't know if I have the right to ask you to wait while I figure it out. You didn't come here to be my second choice or to compete with a ghost." "I didn't come here for any of this," Clara said, finding her voice. "I came here to marry a stranger and build a practical life. Instead, I nearly died, got rescued by a widower and his son, and ended up working as a housekeeper in a house that still belongs to a woman I'll never meet." She laughed, but it came out bitter. "Nothing about this situation is what I planned." "Plans change." "Do they? Or do we just keep fooling ourselves that we have any control over our lives?" Clara moved to the window, putting distance between them. "I've spent the last week sleeping in your wife's bed, using her things, trying to fill a space she left behind. But I can't fill it, Caleb. I can't be her." "I'm not asking you to be her." "Then what are you asking?" The question hung between them. Caleb was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm asking for time. Time to figure out how to honor what I had with Sarah while still being open to what might be possible with you. Time to do this right, instead of rushing into something we're not ready for." Clara turned to face him. "And what do I do in the meantime? Keep working here? Keep living in this house? Keep pretending my heart isn't involved?" "Is it? Involved, I mean." "Yes," Clara said, the admission tearing out of her. "Yes, damn it. Which is terrifying, because I barely know you, and this is all happening too fast, and I swore I'd never let myself be vulnerable like this again." Caleb closed the distance between them in 3 strides. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that Clara could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, could smell the soap he'd used that morning. "I'm scared too," he said. "Scared of betraying Sarah's memory, scared of hurting you, scared of getting this wrong and losing what we have." "What do we have?" "I don't know yet, but I want to find out, if you'll give me the time to figure it out." Before Clara could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approached fast. They stepped apart as Thomas burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. "Pa, there's a woman at the gate. Says she needs to see you. Says it's about Mr. Hendricks." Caleb's expression hardened. What about him? She wouldn't say, just that it's important, private. Clara followed Caleb outside, Thomas trailing behind them. At the gate sat a wagon driven by a woman Clara didn't recognize, perhaps 30, plainly dressed, with the kind of face that had seen too much hardship too young. "Mr. Mercer," the woman called. "That's me? What can I do for you?" "My name's Lily Patterson. I need to talk to you about James Hendricks and his business with mail-order brides." Clara felt her stomach drop. Caleb glanced at her, then back to the woman. "Come inside. It's too cold to talk out here." In the kitchen, over coffee that Clara poured with shaking hands, Lily Patterson told her story. She'd been the second bride Hendricks had sent for, arriving a year ago with hopes of marriage and a new life. "He took one look at me and said I was too thin," Lily said, her voice flat. "Said he needed a woman who could work hard, and I looked like I'd break in a strong wind. Sent me back the same day." "Where did you go?" Clara asked. "Martha Cunningham took me in. Let me work at the store for room and board. I've been there ever since." Lily wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "But yesterday, another woman came through, Rebecca Marsh. She answered one of Hendricks' advertisements, too. When she got to his ranch, he turned her away. Said she was too old." "How old?" Caleb asked. 38. Clara felt sick. He's still doing it, still luring women here just to reject them. "It's worse than that," Lily said. "Rebecca had a daughter with her, 12 years old. Hendricks took one look at the girl and said he didn't want to deal with stepchildren, turned them both out. In the cold." "Where are they now?" Caleb demanded. "Martha's got them at the store, but Rebecca's running out of money and she's got nowhere to go. Can't afford passage back east and the station's closed anyway." Caleb stood abruptly, pacing to the window. How many women has he done this to?" "That I know of? 5, counting Clara. But there might be more who left the territory before word got around." 5 women, Clara said quietly. 5 women who spent everything they had to answer his advertisements, all of them rejected for reasons that had nothing to do with the requirements he listed. "That's fraud," Caleb said. "Plain and simple. He's taking their money under false pretenses." "But he didn't take their money directly," Lily pointed out. "They spent it getting here. Legally, I don't know if that counts." "Then we make it count." Clara stood, a sudden determination flooding through her. "We find the other women. We get their stories. We go to the territorial court and make a formal complaint." Caleb turned to look at her, surprise and something like admiration in his eyes. "That's a long shot. Courts don't usually care about women's complaints," Clara finished. "I know, but we have to try. We can't let him keep doing this." "I'll help," Lily said, "and I know Rebecca will too. She's furious." "What about the first bride?" Thomas asked from his corner. "The one before Lily?" "Mary Chen," Lily said. "She married a rancher up near the border. Might be hard to reach her in winter, but I could try writing." "Do it," Clara said. "We need everyone who's willing to speak." Over the next week, the house transformed into something between a war room and a refuge. Rebecca and her daughter Emma arrived the next day, Martha having insisted they'd be better off at the ranch than cramped in the back room of the store. Emma was a quiet girl with her mother's dark hair and a watchful expression that spoke of someone who'd learned early to be cautious. Clara found her in Sarah's old room one afternoon, staring out the window at the snow. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Clara said softly. Emma jumped, then nodded. "I've never seen this much snow. We're from Kansas." Your first winter out west, then?" "Probably our last. Mama says we'll go back as soon as the trains run again." Emma's voice was small. "I don't want to go back. There's nothing there for us." Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. "Why did you come west?" "Mama thought we'd have a better life. Papa died 2 years ago, left us with debts. Mama worked herself sick trying to pay them off. When she saw Mr. Hendricks' advertisement, she thought—" Emma trailed off. "She thought someone might want us, both of us." The simple pain in those words cut Clara to the bone. "Oh, sweetheart. Are you going to help Mama the way Mr. Mercer helped you?" Clara looked at this child who'd already learned that the world could be cruel, that adults could lie, that hope was dangerous. "Yes, we're going to help. All of us together." "How?" By making sure Mr. Hendricks can't hurt anyone else, by telling the truth about what he did, and by showing you and your mother that not everyone in this territory is like him. Emma considered this. Mr. Mercer seems nice, and Thomas showed me the barn cats. There are 6 of them. Thomas loves those cats more than he'd admit. He said his mama used to feed them scraps, said she believed everything deserved kindness, even barn cats. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. Sarah Mercer's legacy lived on in her son, in the way he showed kindness to a frightened girl, in the simple act of sharing stories about someone he'd loved. That evening, with Rebecca and Emma settled upstairs and Lily having returned to town with messages for Martha, Clara found herself alone with Caleb again. They sat in the kitchen after dinner, the comfortable silence between them a stark contrast to the tension of days before. "You've started something," Caleb said, "taking on Hendricks like this." "Someone had to." "Could be dangerous. Man like that, backed into a corner, might lash out." Clara met his eyes steadily. "I survived a blizzard. I think I can handle James Hendricks." Caleb smiled, and it transformed his face. "I believe you can, but you won't have to do it alone." "Caleb, I mean it. Whatever you need to make this case, you've got my support. Money for a lawyer if it comes to that. Transportation to wherever we need to go. A place for these women to stay while we figure this out. All of it." "Why? You barely know them." "I know you, and I know you wouldn't be fighting this hard if it wasn't the right thing to do." He leaned forward. "Besides, Hendricks needs to be stopped. If not for the women he's already hurt, then for the ones who might answer his next advertisement." Over the following days, letters went out across the territory. Martha proved invaluable, using her network of store owners and postal workers to track down the women Hendricks had rejected. One by one, their responses arrived. Mary Chen wrote from her ranch, detailing how Hendricks had rejected her because she was Oriental, despite his advertisement never mentioning race as a factor. She was happy now, married to a good man, but the memory of that humiliation still stung. Another woman, Elizabeth Stone, had been rejected for being too educated. Hendricks apparently didn't want a wife who could read and write better than he could. By the end of February, they had 7 women willing to testify. 7 stories of men who'd spent their last dollars on hope, only to be crushed by arbitrary rejection. "It's enough," Clara said one evening, spreading the letters across the kitchen table. "It has to be enough." "The question is, will the territorial court see it that way?" Rebecca said. She'd grown bolder over the weeks, the frightened woman who'd arrived transforming into someone with fire in her eyes. "Only one way to find out," Caleb said. "We file a formal complaint, request a hearing." "Who writes it?" Thomas asked. He'd been sitting in on their planning sessions, listening intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood more than they gave him credit for. "I will," Clara said. "I've kept books long enough to know how to write a formal document, and I've got the most recent experience with Hendricks. My testimony will be fresh." She spent 3 days drafting the complaint, working late into the night by lamplight, choosing each word carefully. It had to be factual, unemotional, ironclad in its logic. She detailed the advertisements, the false promises, the systematic pattern of rejection. She included affidavits from all 7 women, each one signed and witnessed. When she finally finished, her hand cramping from hours of writing, she read it aloud to the assembled group. "To the Territorial Court of Wyoming Territory," she began. "We, the undersigned, do hereby submit this formal complaint against Mr. James Hendricks of the Broken H Ranch for the crime of fraudulent misrepresentation and unjust enrichment." The words rolled out, formal and precise, building a case that even Clara could see was compelling. When she finished, silence filled the room. "That's good," Rebecca said finally. "That's really good." "Question is, will a judge think so?" Lily asked. "Judge Morrison's fair," Caleb said. "Tough, but fair. If we can get this in front of him, he'll at least hear us out." "When's his next circuit?" Clara asked. 2 weeks. He'll be in Sweetwater for 3 days hearing cases." 2 weeks. Clara felt her stomach tighten with nerves. 2 weeks to prepare, to gather every piece of evidence, to make sure their case was airtight. The night before they were scheduled to present their complaint, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through arguments in her mind, anticipating objections, rehearsing responses. A soft knock on her door made her jump. "Clara? You awake?" Caleb's voice, quiet in the darkness. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. He stood in the hallway in his work clothes, looking like he'd been up for hours. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much thinking. Wanted to make sure you're all right." "Nervous, but all right." They stood in the doorway, neither quite willing to cross the threshold, both aware of the impropriety and neither caring quite enough to walk away. "Clara, whatever happens tomorrow—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't say it's going to be all right, because we don't know that. Don't say we did our best, because it might not be enough. Just stand with me. That's all I need." Caleb reached out, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he touched her deliberately. His hand found hers in the darkness, warm and steady and sure. "I'll stand with you," he said, "no matter what." The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through the territory about the complaint, and it seemed like half of Sweetwater had turned out to watch. Clara recognized Caroline Fletcher in the front row, her expression gleeful at the prospect of scandal, but she also saw Martha and the pastor's wife, and a dozen other faces that looked sympathetic rather than judgmental. Judge Morrison was exactly as Caleb had described, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He called the court to order with a bang of his gavel, then looked down at the papers before him. "I've reviewed the complaint filed by Miss Clara Whitmore and others against Mr. James Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks, you're present?" Hendricks stood from his seat near the back, his lawyer beside him. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you've had opportunity to review the charges?" "I have, Your Honor. And I maintain that these charges are baseless. I have every right to choose who I marry." "That's not in dispute," the judge said dryly. "What's in dispute is whether you fraudulently induced these women to travel here under false pretenses. Miss Whitmore, you're representing the complainants?" Clara stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor." "Present your case." For the next hour, Clara laid out their evidence. She read from the advertisements showing how Hendricks had specifically stated that age and appearance were less important than character and capability. She presented testimony from 7 women, each one detailing how they'd been rejected for the very things Hendricks claimed didn't matter. She showed patterns. Hendricks never kept a bride longer than a day. He never attempted to get to know them, never gave them a chance. He simply looked at them, found them wanting, and sent them away. The women were damaged, Clara said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. Not just financially, though that damage was severe. They spent everything they had to answer these advertisements. But the emotional damage was worse. Each of these women was told she wasn't good enough, too old, too thin, too educated, too foreign. The specific reasons changed, but the message was always the same. You are not what I wanted, despite what my advertisement promised. That's not fraud, Hendricks' lawyer interjected. That's personal preference. Personal preference disclosed after the fact, Clara shot back. If Mr. Hendricks wanted a woman under 30, he should have stated that in his advertisement. If he wanted someone uneducated, he should have said so. If he didn't want stepchildren, that should have been clear from the beginning. Instead, he lured these women here with false promises, then rejected them for criteria he never mentioned. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Hendricks, why didn't you specify your requirements more clearly in your advertisements? Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. I didn't think I needed to be that specific. Or perhaps you knew that if you were honest about your requirements, no one would respond, the judge suggested. I had the right to change my mind. 7 times, Clara interrupted. You changed your mind 7 times, Your Honor. 7 different women, 7 different reasons for rejection. That's not changing your mind, that's a pattern. The judge studied the documents before him. The court finds this pattern troubling. Mr. Hendricks, did you reimburse any of these women for their travel expenses? No, Your Honor. They came of their own free will, under false pretenses, the judge said flatly. Miss Whitmore, what remedy are you seeking? Clara took a breath. This was the moment they'd planned for. We're seeking 3 things, Your Honor. First, financial compensation for each woman equal to their documented travel expenses. Second, a court order requiring Mr. Hendricks to cease advertising for mail-order brides unless he provides honest and complete information about his requirements. Third, A public judgment that makes clear this behavior constitutes fraud under territorial law. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Hendrick's face went red. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I won't be dictated to by— You'll be quiet, the judge snapped. This court has heard enough. I'm calling a recess to review the evidence and render a decision. Court will reconvene in 1 hour. The hour felt like an eternity. Clara paced in the small room Martha had secured for them, while Rebecca sat with her hands clasped, and Lily stared out the window. Caleb stood near the door, his presence steady and reassuring. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you made them listen. That counts for something. Does it? If he wins, if the judge rules in his favor, then we'll appeal. We'll take it to the territorial legislature if we have to. But you made them listen, Clara. You made them see these women as people, not just inconveniences. When they returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression was unreadable. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony, he began. The question before us is whether Mr. Hendrick's actions constitute fraud under territorial law. The answer is complex. Clara felt her heart sink. However, the judge continued, the pattern of behavior documented here is clear. Mr. Hendricks has repeatedly advertised for brides using language that suggested openness to women of various ages and backgrounds, then rejected those women based on criteria he never disclosed. While personal preference in marriage is protected, deliberately misleading multiple women for apparent purposes of what, Mr. Hendricks? Entertainment? Ego? The court finds this pattern unconscionable. Hendricks half rose from his seat. Your Honor, I'm not finished. The judge's voice was steel. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the complainants on all counts. Mr. Hendricks is hereby ordered to pay restitution to each woman in the amount of their documented travel expenses, plus damages for emotional distress in the amount of $50 per complainant. Furthermore, Mr. Hendricks is prohibited from advertising for mail-order brides for a period of 5 years unless he provides complete and honest disclosure of all requirements and preferences. Finally, this judgment shall be published in all territorial newspapers as a matter of public record. The courtroom exploded. Clara felt her knees go weak. Rebecca grabbed her arm, tears streaming down her face. Lily was laughing and crying at the same time. Caleb's hand found Clara's back, steadying her. You did it, he said softly. You actually did it. But Clara was watching Hendricks, who stood frozen in shock, his face purple with rage. When his eyes met hers, she saw pure hatred there, and she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Hendricks stormed from the courtroom without another word, his lawyer scrambling to follow. Clara watched him go. That look of hatred burned into her memory, and felt Caleb's hand tighten on her shoulder. We should get back to the ranch, he said quietly, before dark. But the celebration had already begun. Martha pushed through the crowd with tears in her eyes, pulling Clara into a fierce embrace. You brave, brilliant woman, she said. Do you know what you've done? You've changed the law, set a precedent. Every woman in this territory owes you a debt. I just told the truth, Clara said, overwhelmed by the attention. The truth that nobody else had the courage to speak. Martha pulled back, holding Clara at arm's length. You're a hero, whether you want to be or not. The words sat uncomfortably on Clara. She wasn't a hero. She was just a woman who'd been wronged and decided to fight back. But looking around at the faces in the courtroom, women mostly, but some men too, she saw something that looked like hope, like possibility, like change. The ride back to the ranch was subdued despite their victory. Thomas chattered excitedly about the trial, but Clara couldn't shake the image of Hendrick's face, the rage barely contained behind his eyes. He's not going to let this go, she said to Caleb when Thomas had finally run out of steam. Probably not. But what can he do? The judge's ruling is final. He pays the restitution or he goes to jail. Money's not what I'm worried about. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You think he'll come after you directly? It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. Then we'll be ready. I'll have Thomas stay close to the house. We'll keep the rifle loaded, and you don't go anywhere alone, not until this settles. I won't be a prisoner in my own home because of that man. You won't be a prisoner. You'll be careful. There's a difference. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the house settle around her. Rebecca and Emma were asleep in the next room, Lily having returned to town after the trial. Downstairs, she could hear the low murmur of Caleb and Thomas talking, probably discussing security measures. She'd done what she set out to do: won justice for herself and 6 other women, set a legal precedent that would protect future victims. So why did she feel so unsettled? Because winning in court didn't erase the humiliation of that first rejection, didn't undo the terror of nearly dying in the snow, didn't solve the fundamental problem of her life. She was still 43, still unmarried, still without a clear path forward. The job at the ranch was temporary, she reminded herself. Once spring came, once the trains ran again, she'd have enough money saved to go where? Back to Philadelphia and her old life? Somewhere new? And what about these feelings for Caleb that grew stronger every day despite her best efforts to contain them? A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Clara? You still awake? Rebecca's voice, quiet in the darkness. Clara rose and opened the door. Rebecca stood in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking younger and more vulnerable than Clara had seen her. Can't sleep either? Clara asked. Too much excitement. My mind won't stop racing. Rebecca glanced down the hallway. Can we talk? They went to Clara's room, sitting together on the bed like schoolgirls sharing secrets. Rebecca twisted her hands in her lap, clearly working up to something. I wanted to thank you, she said finally, for everything, for taking us in, for fighting for us, for giving Emma hope again. You don't need to thank me. We helped each other. No, it was more than that. You gave me my dignity back. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. When Hendricks turned us away, I felt like I'd failed Emma. Failed as a mother, as a woman. Like maybe he was right. Maybe I was too old and too burdened to deserve a second chance. Rebecca, but watching you stand up to him, watching you refuse to accept his judgment, it reminded me that my worth isn't determined by whether some man wants me. That Emma and I deserve better, that we can make our own chances. Clara felt her own throat tighten. What will you do now? With the restitution money? I've been thinking about that. Rebecca smiled through her tears. Martha offered me a permanent job at the store. Not much pay, but enough to support us. And there's a small house near the station that's coming available to rent. Emma could go to the school here, make friends. We could build a life. That sounds wonderful. It does, doesn't it? A real life. Not the one I planned with a husband and a ranch, but maybe something better. Something that's entirely ours. Rebecca reached out and squeezed Clara's hand. What about you? What will you do? It was the question Clara had been avoiding. I don't know yet. You could stay here. Caleb needs you, even if he hasn't figured out how to say it properly. Clara looked away. It's more complicated than that. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty simple. He cares about you. You care about him. What's complicated about that? His wife is dead, Rebecca said bluntly. I don't mean that cruelly, but it's the truth. Sarah's gone, Caleb's still here, and so are you. I can't compete with a ghost. Then don't compete. Just be yourself. That's what he needs, someone real, someone alive, someone who isn't trying to be Sarah. Rebecca stood, moving toward the door. Think about it. You fought for 7 women's right to be valued for who they are. Maybe it's time to fight for your own right to the same thing. After Rebecca left, Clara sat in the darkness thinking about ghosts and second chances and the difference between existing and truly living. She'd spent so many years being practical, being careful, accepting whatever scraps of life came her way. When had she last fought for something she wanted rather than just against something that hurt her? The answer came swift and painful. Never. She'd never fought for what she wanted because she'd never believed she deserved to want anything. But maybe that was changing. Maybe standing up to Hendricks had awakened something in her, a belief that her desires mattered, that her voice deserved to be heard, that at 43 she still had the right to reach for happiness instead of just survival. The question was, did she have the courage to reach? 3 days after the trial, the answer came in the form of fire. Clara woke to Thomas pounding on her door, shouting her name. She stumbled out of bed, disoriented, and saw orange light flickering outside her window. Fire, Thomas yelled. The barn's on fire! She threw on clothes and ran downstairs, finding Caleb already outside with buckets, Thomas right behind him. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky, smoke billowing black against the stars. "The animals!" Clara screamed. "Already out," Caleb shouted back. "Got them to the far pasture, just trying to save what we can of the building." They formed a bucket brigade. Caleb, Thomas, Clara, and Rebecca, who'd come running from the house. But it was hopeless. The fire was too advanced, too hot, too hungry. All they could do was watch as the barn burned, taking with it hay stores, equipment, and months of work. When the fire finally died down to smoking ruins, they stood exhausted and soot-covered in the yard. Emma had stayed with the animals, keeping them calm, and now came running back. "Mama, I found something," she said, holding out a piece of cloth. "This was caught on the fence near where the fire started." Caleb took it, examining it in the growing dawn light. Clara saw his face go hard. "This is from a shirt. Someone set this fire deliberately." The words hung in the air. Clara felt ice flood her veins despite the heat still radiating from the ruins. "Hendrix," she said. "We don't know that," Caleb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Who else would do this? Who else has reason to want to hurt us?" Thomas picked up something else from the ground, a whiskey bottle, empty. "Pa, this was near the fence too." Caleb took it, his jaw tightening. "Pike, Hendrick's driver. Man's never without his bottle." "We need to report this," Clara said. "Go to the sheriff." "And say what? That we found a piece of cloth and an empty bottle? That's not proof." "Then what do we do? Wait for him to try again?" Before Caleb could answer, they heard hoofbeats. A horse approached at speed and Clara's hand went to her throat, fear spiking through her. But it was Martha, her face grim. "Thank heaven you're all safe," she said, dismounting. "I saw the smoke from town, came as fast as I could." "The barn's gone," Caleb said flatly. "But we got the animals out." Martha looked at the ruins, then at Caleb. "There's more. Hendricks left town this morning, loaded up his wagon, and headed east. Word is he's abandoning the ranch, fleeing before the restitution payments come due." "Abandoning?" Clara felt dizzy. "He's running away?" "Looks that way. Sheriff's at his ranch now, but the place is empty. Hendricks cleared out everything of value and left." Caleb swore. "So he burns my barn as a final act of revenge, then runs like a coward." "We still can't prove he set the fire," Martha said. "But between you and me, I'd bet my store on it." The loss of the barn meant scrambling to salvage their situation. Caleb had to arrange temporary shelter for the equipment, find alternative storage for feed, reorganize the entire operation. Clara threw herself into helping, working alongside him from dawn to dusk, both of them too exhausted at day's end to do anything but collapse. But on the third day after the fire, as Clara was organizing the temporary feed storage in one of the outbuildings, she found Caleb standing in the ruins of the barn, just staring at the charred remains. "Hey," she said softly. "You all right?" "Sarah and I built that barn with our own hands," he said, his voice rough. "First summer we were here. Took us 3 months, working from sunup to sundown. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours." Clara moved to stand beside him. "I'm sorry. It's just wood and nails, can be rebuilt." But his face said otherwise. "It's not just wood and nails, it's your history, your memories. Another piece of Sarah gone." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something break open in his expression. "Every time I think I'm ready to move forward, something pulls me back. First it was her clothes in the closet, then her books, then her sewing things, now the barn. How am I supposed to let go when everything around me holds her memory?" "Maybe you're not supposed to let go," Clara said carefully. "Maybe you're supposed to hold the memories and build new ones at the same time." "How? How do I do both?" Clara took a breath, knowing she was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. "By choosing to. By deciding that loving Sarah and what you had doesn't mean you can't love someone else. By believing you deserve happiness even though she's gone." "And what if I'm not ready?" "Then you're not ready. And that's okay. But Caleb, you can't keep living in the past. It's not fair to Thomas, who needs a father focused on the present. It's not fair to yourself. And it's not fair to—" She trailed off. "To you?" Clara met his eyes. "Yes, to me. Because I've fallen in love with you, and I know that's probably the worst timing in the world. And I know you're not ready, and I know I'm competing with the ghost of a woman I'll never measure up to. But there it is, that's the truth. The silence stretched between them. Clara waited for rejection, for the gentle letting down, for confirmation that she'd been foolish to hope. Instead, Caleb stepped forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was asking a question. Then Clara's arms went around his neck and his hands found her waist, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and real and alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm terrified," he whispered. "Me too. I don't know how to do this. Don't know how to love someone new without feeling like I'm betraying what I had." "Then we'll figure it out together. Take it slow, one day at a time." "Clara, I can't promise you." "I don't need promises. I just need honesty. And a chance." He pulled back enough to look at her fully. "You've had a chance since the moment you collapsed on my porch. You just didn't know it yet." They stood in the ruins of the old barn, holding each other while the sun rose higher, warming the earth, melting the last of winter's snow. And Clara felt something shift inside her, not the frantic hope of her journey west, but something steadier, something that felt like home. Over the following weeks, spring came to Wyoming with startling speed. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that quickly turned green. Wildflowers appeared in impossible colors. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and the ranch hummed with life. Rebecca and Emma moved to their house near the station, Rebecca taking up her position at Martha's store with enthusiasm. Lily remained as well, finding work as a teacher for the small school. The other women who'd testified at the trial wrote letters updating Clara on their lives. Mary Chen was expecting her first child. Elizabeth Stone had opened a dressmaking shop in her town. And at the Mercer Ranch, something new was being built. Not just the barn, though that was rising too. A larger structure than before, with help from neighbors who'd heard about the fire and come to assist. But something else. Something that couldn't be measured in timber and nails. Clara and Caleb moved forward carefully, like people learning to walk after a long illness. They took their time, getting to know each other beyond crisis and necessity. He showed her the far corners of the ranch, the places he and Sarah had loved. She shared stories of her childhood, her dreams, her failures. Thomas watched with barely concealed delight, dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about how nice it would be if Clara stayed permanently. "Just saying," he'd announced at dinner, "the house needs a woman's touch. Not that Pa and I aren't managing, but Thomas," Caleb would say warningly, "I'm just making an observation." Clara would hide her smile behind her coffee cup, warmth spreading through her chest. The restitution payments came through in April, 7 checks delivered by the sheriff, each one representing justice served. Clara used her money to buy fabric and supplies, transforming Sarah's old sewing room into a proper workspace. She started taking in work from women in the territory, alterations, custom pieces, teaching others the craft she'd spent decades perfecting. Word spread. Soon she had more work than she could handle alone. She hired Rebecca part-time, teaching her the finer points of tailoring. Then she took on Emma as an apprentice, the girl proving to have a natural talent with needle and thread. By early May, what had started as simple mending had grown into a small business. Clara found herself managing not just a household, but an enterprise, one that valued skill over youth, experience over appearance, capability over conventional beauty. One evening, as she worked late finishing a wedding dress for a rancher's daughter, Caleb came to stand in the doorway. "You've built something remarkable," he said. Clara looked up from her stitching. "It's just sewing. It's more than that. You've created something that matters, given other women a skill they can use to support themselves. Emma's already better at this than most girls twice her age. She's talented, reminds me of myself at that age, before life got complicated." Caleb moved into the room, examining the dress laid out on the table. "This is beautiful work." "Thank you." Clara set down her needle. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy with how things are between us?" He turned to face her fully. "I'm happier than I've been in 2 years. Maybe happier than I've ever been, which scares me sometimes." "Why does it scare you?" "Because happiness feels dangerous, like something that can be taken away." He sat down across from her. "After Sarah died, I thought the safest thing was to not feel anything. Work until I was too exhausted to think. Focus on Thomas and the ranch and nothing else. Then you showed up and made that impossible. I'm sorry. Don't be. You saved my life just as surely as I saved yours that night in the storm. I was dying too, just more slowly. Clara reached across the table, taking his hand. So what do we do now? Now? Caleb smiled, and it reached his eyes, lighting up his whole face. Now I ask you a question I should have asked weeks ago. He stood, and to Clara's shock, he knelt down beside her chair. Clara Whitmore, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Caleb, I don't have a ring yet, and I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I also know I don't want to spend another day pretending you're just my housekeeper. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you make this house feel alive. I love how you've given Thomas someone to look up to, how you've built something meaningful from nothing. I love you, and I want everyone to know it. Tears streamed down Clara's face. What about Sarah? Sarah would want me to be happy. She'd want Thomas to have a mother figure who loves him, and I hope, she'd approve of you. You're nothing like her, and that's good. That's right. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. Clara slid from her chair to kneel facing him, taking both his hands in hers. Yes, I'll marry you. The kiss they shared was different from that first one in the barn ruins, less desperate, more certain, a promise rather than a question. When? Caleb asked when they finally broke apart. Soon, Clara said. Before I lose my nerve or you change your mind. I won't change my mind. Then soon. They set the date for 3 weeks later, enough time to make arrangements but not enough to overthink. Clara insisted on making her own wedding dress. Not her mother's this time, but something new. Something that represented who she was now, not who she'd been or who others expected her to be. She worked on it in secret, the same way she'd once worked on other people's clothes in her Philadelphia boarding house. But this time, every stitch was for herself, for her future, for the life she was choosing rather than accepting. The dress took shape slowly, simple but elegant, in a deep blue that brought out her eyes. No lace, no frills, just clean lines and expert craftsmanship. A dress for a woman who'd survived a blizzard and fought a legal battle and learned to believe she deserved happiness. Rebecca and Emma helped with the final details. Lily offered to do Clara's hair. Martha insisted on hosting a celebration at the store after the ceremony. And Thomas, sweet Thomas, asked if he could walk Clara down the aisle. You're the closest thing I've got to family here, he said, embarrassed, unless you think that's weird, since I'm going to be your stepson. Clara pulled him into a fierce hug. I'd be honored. The wedding took place on a Sunday in late May, when the wildflowers were at their peak and the sky was impossibly blue. The ceremony was held in the small church in Sweetwater, with what seemed like half the territory in attendance. Clara walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm, wearing her blue dress and carrying wildflowers Emma had picked that morning. She saw faces she recognized, Martha beaming from the front pew, Rebecca dabbing at her eyes, even some of the other women who'd testified against Hendricks, having traveled to be there. And at the altar stood Caleb, wearing his best suit and looking at her like she was the only person in the world. The pastor kept the ceremony short and simple. Clara barely heard the words, focused entirely on Caleb's hands holding hers, warm and steady and sure. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man? I do, she said before he could finish. Laughter rippled through the congregation. Even the pastor smiled. Well then, and do you, Caleb Mercer? I do, he said firmly. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was chaste, appropriate for church, but Clara felt the promise in it. Of nights to come, of years to build, of a future they'd create together. The celebration at Martha's store lasted until well after dark. There was food and music and dancing. Thomas performed a surprisingly eloquent toast that had half the crowd in tears. Martha gave a speech about second chances that had the other half dabbing at their eyes. And through it all, Clara kept finding Caleb's hand, needing to touch him, to confirm this was real, that she was married, that she had a husband who loved her, a stepson who welcomed her, a home that was truly hers. As the party wound down, Clara found herself standing outside the store with Rebecca and Lily, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I never thought I'd see you this happy," Rebecca said. "That first day, when we arrived at the ranch, you looked so lost." "I was lost. Didn't even know it until I found my way." "You didn't find your way," Lily corrected. "You made your way. That's different." Clara considered that. "I suppose I did. We all did, didn't we? Made our own ways when the paths we thought we were on disappeared." "To making our own ways," Rebecca said, raising her glass. They clinked glasses under the stars. Three women who'd come west looking for husbands and found something better. Themselves. That night, in the ranch house that was now officially her home, Clara stood at the window of the bedroom she now shared with Caleb, looking out at the land bathed in moonlight. Behind her, she could hear him moving around, getting ready for bed, and her heart was so full it almost hurt. "Come to bed," he called softly. Clara turned to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it took her breath away. "I'm coming, just taking it all in. This view, this house, this life." "Our life," he corrected, holding out his hand. Clara crossed to him, taking his hand, letting him pull her close. "Our life," she agreed. As summer arrived in full force, the ranch flourished. The new barn stood complete, larger and better than the old one. The cattle thrived. Thomas grew taller, his voice deepening, his shoulders broadening. He was becoming a man, and Clara found herself grateful to be there to witness it. Her sewing business expanded until she had to turn away work. She trained 3 more women as apprentices, passing on skills that had once been her only means of survival and were now her joy. The sewing room became a gathering place, filled with laughter and conversation and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Rebecca flourished at the store, eventually becoming Martha's partner. Emma excelled at school and with her sewing, already talking about opening her own dress shop someday. News came that Hendricks had been found living in a mining camp in Montana, destitute and bitter. Clara felt pity more than satisfaction. He'd destroyed his own life through cruelty and pride, and that seemed punishment enough. One evening in late July, as Clara sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Caleb joined her with 2 cups of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside hers. "Just thinking about journeys, how strange they can be." "Strange how?" "I came west to find a husband. Instead, I nearly died, fought a legal battle, started a business, and ended up with a family I never expected. None of it went according to plan." "Glad it didn't?" Clara looked at him, this man who'd opened his door to a stranger dying in the snow and given her not just shelter, but a future. "Grateful beyond words. If things had gone according to plan, I'd be married to Hendricks, living a miserable life trying to be someone I'm not. Or dead in the snow. Or that." She shuddered. "Instead, I'm here. With you. With Thomas. With work I love and a home I chose. It's not the life I planned, but it's so much better than anything I could have imagined." Caleb took her hand. "I was thinking we should expand the house, add on a few rooms. Your sewing business is growing, and Thomas won't be young forever. Someday he'll want his own space. Maybe bring home a wife of his own." "A wife?" Clara laughed. "He's only 16, 17 next month, and growing fast. Before we know it, he'll be a man with his own life. I want to make sure this house can accommodate whatever comes. A growing family, grandchildren, maybe. A future we can't predict but can prepare for." The word grandchildren made Clara's heart squeeze. She was 43, past the age of bearing her own children, but the thought of Thomas someday having a family, of being a grandmother to his children, that was a gift she hadn't dared imagine. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Planning for a future. Building something that lasts." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, the sky turning from gold to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. The cattle lowed softly in the pastures. The world was alive and beautiful and full of possibility. Clara thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate, frightened, willing to marry a stranger for security. That woman seemed like someone from another lifetime. She'd been so small, so convinced her worth was determined by whether a man chose her. Now she knew better. Her worth came from within, from her courage, her skills, her refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier, from the way she'd stood up for herself and others, from the life she'd built with her own hands. "What are you smiling about?" Caleb asked. "I was just thinking that I used to believe my life was over at 43, that I'd missed my chance, that all the good things had passed me by. And now? Now I think maybe life doesn't really begin until you're brave enough to reach for what you want. Age doesn't matter. Timing doesn't matter. What matters is having the courage to try." Caleb lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You're the bravest person I know." "I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn. Too stubborn to die in a blizzard. Too stubborn to accept injustice. Too stubborn to give up on happiness." Stubbornness, bravery, sometimes they're the same thing. As the stars began to appear overhead, Clara leaned her head on Caleb's shoulder, feeling profoundly at peace. She'd crossed half a country on a desperate gamble. She'd nearly died in the snow. She'd been rejected and humiliated and left with nothing. But from that nothing, she'd built everything. A home, a business, a family, a future that was entirely her own. The woman who'd been abandoned in the snow had found more than shelter. She'd found herself. And in finding herself, she'd discovered that second chances weren't given, they were claimed. By women brave enough or stubborn enough or desperate enough to reach for them. By women who refused to let age or circumstance or other people's cruelty define their worth. By women who understood that winter always gave way to spring if you could just survive long enough to see it. Clara had survived. More than survived. She'd flourished. And sitting on the porch of her home, her husband beside her, the stars emerging overhead, she knew with absolute certainty that the best parts of her life were still ahead. Not because someone had chosen her, but because she'd chosen herself. And that made all the difference.